journalist and fiction writer, and I'm very pleased to be hosting the Writers Guild of Alberta reading series tonight. We're hosting Leif Gregersen with his book, Alert and Oriented ×3. Leif is also from Edmonton. I just like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. And now I'm going to introduce Leif, and then he's going to do a reading for you.
Hi there. Leif? Oh, sorry.
Oh, do you want me to start and read your bio?
I can read your bio. Yeah, please. That would be great.
Okay. Leif Gregersen is a sought-after poet, often asked to write and read poems for special events. He has published 4 books of poetry, along with 3 memoirs of his experience with mental illness, 3 short story collections, and 2 short novels. He is also a freelance journalist, public speaker, and teacher. Leif has won numerous awards for his writing, including 3 story slams and a short story contest with 500 writers competing against him. His work can be found on Amazon.ca and at the Edmonton Public Library, and he is always happy to mail signed copies of his books upon request. Leif feels that first and foremost, his purpose is to reduce the stigma and increase awareness of mental illness. His work is carried out in hopes of easing the suffering of people who are afflicted with chronic mental health issues and their loved ones.
Okay, so this is my book, Alert and Oriented ×3. It came out, it resulted from me having a change in medications. I had been doing really well for about 18 years, and I had a change of medications to a very new, it wasn't very experimental, but it was a very groundbreaking medication. And it simply didn't work for me, and I slipped into psychosis. And so I wanted to read from my book. The first thing I wanted to read was a statement at the beginning that my father wrote. He just put everything together so well and expressed it so well that I decided it'd be a good way to introduce the book to you. At a very early stage in Leif's childhood, we detected something not quite right without being able to name it. And I suppose not quite willing to accept that our youngest son had shortcomings that very much appeared to be beyond our ability to do much to heal. As Leif advanced to school age, the expected improvements did not take place, and he now began showing signs of depression that began devastating our family. Coping with an immature child having episodes of an illness that belongs to an adult was at best extremely difficult and often demanded time Leif's brother and sister did not get. Still, Leif displayed an intelligence far beyond expectations, and then again, he really did not have the knowledge or methods of application that could have given direction. Teachers at school tried time and again to give leads and directions, which eventually failed. He simply did not have the fertile grounds to allow for growth. Throughout elementary school, Leif did well as far as classroom work was concerned. He maintained reasonable grades, but was not able to create bonds with the children in his grades. During these years, we were continually faced with withdrawals and isolations that at times appeared to be endless and also impossible to penetrate. When we caught these early enough, it was possible to take Leif out for long drives. During these trips, he would sleep a great deal and gradually come out of depression and again take part in activities going on around him. This too was time consuming and not always possible, being self-employed at the time. His mother staying home was a huge help. Junior high. Now there's an example why children of that age should not be separated into their own group. The maturity is simply not present. Leif is still as smart as he was then, and yet the aggression needed to deal with individuals and groups was just not there. The one-upmanship is often a very cruel instrument in those who have already been turned in that direction. Patience and consideration were not a part of that setting, and teachers were not always trained in dealing with challenged children. Those were difficult times for Leif, and entering into high school was not really an improvement, although he appeared to be dealing with friends better. Then came the big breakdown that removed every hope we ever had, the realization that Leif was now beyond any hope. There was no help that would ever come was finalized. The devastation was impossible to comprehend. During his ski trip to Jasper, Leif became increasingly incomprehensible. He was in a group along with his sister. The reports we received were mixed and differed in what happened. We gathered that the group had eventually left Leif to his own devices, apparently feeling stretched out, not alone, just off by himself. Within a day of returning home, Leif was admitted to the U of A hospital and remained there for a short period. He was later sent to Alberta Hospital. From there, it became a treadmill, in and out of hospitals, experimentally discharged only to become violent and be forced back into a setting he had become very fed up with. Having alienated himself, it was impossible to live with him. Violence, destruction were repeated again and again. The next years passed with Leif living more like a derelict than anyone deserves. Ultimately, he was given decent living quarters in a group home. The beginning of a return to normalcy began. The progress did not stop and is still going. Today, Leif can boast of the accomplishment of writing 10 volumes of books. Unable to find a publisher, he single-handedly conducted a sales campaign that has yielded great results and kept him fairly affluent, also in part due to the support received from people who became his friends. So that's my dad's introduction. One of the things I did with this book was I added in a lot of different unique things, including my clinical notes from my doctors and nurses and essays and poems I wrote. This is a very short poem that I wrote while I was actually a patient in the what do you call it, the lockdown or the segregation ward for where you go when you just start out there and they don't know how to treat you. So here goes. Deep inside, a mind enslaved, and yet I'm free until the grave. Waits the reaper birth to death, a gasp, a scream, then the final breath. Um, I thought that was kind of an interesting poem. I wrote some commentary to it that you'll see in the book, and I'm going to read that. Something I noticed that often happens to me when I'm a patient in the hospital is that I often arrive aggressive, mean, and verbally abusive. There's a Clint Eastwood movie called Heartbreak Ridge I've seen many times where Clint plays someone who is quite plainly a bully. But in the end of the movie, everyone loves and respects him for being tough enough to train his men properly for combat. And he even rekindles a relationship with his ex-wife as a result of finding his more sensitive side, but still being tough as nails. Often when I'm delusional, I try to act like his character, a mean gunnery sergeant with every insult or karate move always at the ready. After my aggressive stage, I go through a phase where I feel horrible but have plenty of reserve energy. The worst phase to go through is the next one when I have been through so much I'm ready to give up. What is worst about being sick enough to be admitted to the hospital may be the psychosis I experience, but close second is the constant worry that I'll never get out. Now I understand, though evidence from delusions and hallucinations made things pretty convincing, that all the disturbing delusional things weren't true, but I really went through hell as these things were happening. Um, so another part is an introduction I wrote myself. Let's see here. Sorry, this will just take 1 second. Here it is. This is from my introductory notes. My name is Leif Gregersen. I am an author, a brother, a son, a psychiatric survivor, and I like to think I'm also an advocate for the mentally ill. We live in a difficult world, and it sometimes seems to me that nothing has ever been certain. As a young boy, I lived in terror of nuclear war and the destruction of my world and all those I knew and loved. When the nuclear threat seemed to subside in our world, horror stories began to be told as to what would happen to our planet, regardless of whether it was destroyed or not, as the atmosphere was eroding and global warming would soon rob us of the beauty of nature that I had so deeply cherished. Before any part of that issue was settled, I began to realize how many of the choices I made would affect the rest of my life, from my love of cheeseburgers to my choice to smoke cigarettes. And yet, none of these problems could even be considered until I had found peace within myself. More specifically, until I had found medications that would deal with my mental illness and methods of dealing with my fractured personality. In all the years of those difficulties, I never seemed to find the peace that I did from religious practice, from learning more about how to make sense of the world by believing in and having a relationship with a creative and loving force. Even that, though, came sometimes with solid promises of an apop- apocalyptic time and events that seemed to mirror so well what was going on in our troubled world. I remember feeling as though I was watching a perfectly cut piece fit into a jigsaw puzzle when I learned that the Russian word for wormwood, wormwood is a word used in the final book of the Bible to describe the degradation of air and water in the end times. That wormwood was translated as Chernobyl. At a fairly difficult stage in my life, I feel experienced a personal crisis, spending time in psychiatric hospital, experiencing delusions of persecution, delusions of grandeur, and painful, piercing bouts of sadness. What I learned from all that was that it was me that had to change, not the world, not the environment. It couldn't be done by saving souls or self-harm or any of the things the world had taught me that supposedly had to be done. The truth, the true path to peace was to a peace within myself. I've taken the time to write this book, focusing on a recent hospital stay in a psychiatric ward, in hopes that somehow others can read about what I went through as my conception of reality strayed further from the norm. I acted out and even tried to hide myself. These things happened as I reacted to a change in medications. What the mental health system, my family, friends, and I did about this was deceptively simple but unendingly difficult and painful to have done. Without wanting to play the role of a victim, I wrote this volume so that those who don't understand mental illness but are afflicted with it and their loved ones can experience less grief and hardship than I went through. This is why a lot of my friends from my teenage years saw as the true goal of parent. This is what a lot of my friends from my teenage years saw and continue to see as the true goal of parenting, to teach one's children not to make as many mistakes as they have, to let the next generation do one better than they did, as our parents had done for us. So I'm just going to jump ahead um, to another poem that I wrote while in the hospital, just a short one again. A child among the family, gentle love as an autumn breeze, my happy wife, just we three, sacred oath from a bended knee. It's kind of interesting because I was really in a terrible place when I wrote these, but some of them are just kind of moving. Um, so here's what I had to say about that one. It's odd to think of myself as a poet, even though I now live and breathe poetry and have been making a name for myself in Edmonton, not to mention having 4 books in print, being a contributor to a project to engrave poetry on the sidewalk in my neighborhood, being asked to write poems for gatherings, and commanding a good wage as a teacher of poetry classes and workshops. In high school, we took 5 days of an English course and skimmed over a few poems and were expected to be able to converse on them. I still recall people I considered as not as smart as I was being able to give all kinds of feedback about a poem that left me totally at a loss. It was when I read my third Shakespearean play that all that began to change. Something clicked, and all of a sudden the words became electric to me. I soon began to love philosophy, and I honestly consider Shakespeare to be my first taste of it. I recall as a young kid of 11 or 12, our class went to see a play called Billy Bishop Goes to War. It's a single person 2 hour narrative, and when I got home, I tried to act out the whole play for my brother. Some of my greatest regrets are that I never took a drama course, even though I had leanings in that direction. My whole life was about weighing and counting the amount of effort it would take to make money faster one way over another. In high school, I abandoned any fun courses, even gym class and mechanics, in favor of what I thought would get me into university to study law. In one year, as I suffered from horrible depression and insomnia, I quit cadets, met the young woman of my dreams, and became totally enamored with poetry. I recall dragging my parents' huge volume of Edgar Allan Poe to work just to read his incredibly structured and rhyming poetry. Last summer, I edited and instructed disadvantaged people's poetry in a drop-in center and safe injection site called the Bissell Center. What they wrote was put into a book about the opioid crisis called Cycles and Circles, and is something I feel very proud of. I feel it touches the heart of the vulnerable and addicted, and that it helps save lives by getting the problem of addiction out in the open. It even gives maps to safe drug use centers, places to get overdose kits, and how to use them. Writing is magic. I never did marry or have any kids, but now that I've established myself as a poet, I feel I'm no longer the monster I was growing up, who was obsessed with war, hate, anger, violence, rank, and power, and money. Poetry can be so very powerful. It certainly changed me. I honestly feel writing these poems when I was in the hospital gave me a rope to hang on to as I was falling deep into drowning. So, the last part of my reading, I have a poem I titled "I Am Not a Schizophrenic." This is more about the language of schizophrenia, and this is a poem that I didn't write in hospital. I wrote it out full when I was feeling okay. So I am not a schizophrenic. Some people call me schizophrenic, but the fact is I'm not simply some disease. I'm a kid who's seen more crap in 14 years than most people can believe. Some people think they understand my problem. Truth is, I just got off at the wrong stop on the bus route to growing up and freedom. Met a nasty dude who won't let up. I won't speak too much of my new buddy. He got me started smoking heavy weed. Even when my mom told me that I shouldn't, I figured there was no reason to believe. The dude I met was three different voices. They talked me into doing all these things, like smoking pot and drinking. It seemed the only way to make him leave. The first time my parents saw me bring my friend home when I was high and they were watching TV, they figured they would do the right thing, but the last thing they did was talk to me. I ended up locked inside a psych ward, and something I swore I'd never tell. When I told my doctor I liked dope smoking, he told me he smoked the stuff as well. The hospital was a stupid place to send an adolescent. They thought it would help me fix my head and rest. But when they let me out with my bag of medication, back at school, I never had presence of mind to pass a test. These so called experts who I saw there never figured they should talk to me, but all too easily they told my parents how this illness would never let me be. I was put on so many pills, I was a zombie, drooling glassy eyed as one can be. Add to that a month inside the psych ward, and all my classmates laughed and picked on me. As time went by, I seemed to get a little better. Then new voices told me I no longer needed meds. So I took my pills and flushed them down the toilet. And then just hours later, I wished that I were dead. Some people call me schizophrenic. Person with schizophrenia is what you should call me. Take all your stigma now and shove it. I'm a human being, not some disease. So that's my readings.
Thank you very much, Leif, for your readings and for offering us your thoughts and so on. Yeah, I have some questions for you. So
Great.
it seems that you, I'm just really curious, like, when did you start writing?
Well, it's funny because I remember when I was a kid, my dad mentions about how it was hard to get me happy or excited. But I remember before I could write, my parents would get me a pad of blank paper, and I would just be so happy because I could fill it with drawings. And I actually started writing simple stories with drawings of spaceships and things like that. And I think I think another thing was I really liked MASH, and so I would sometimes draw soldiers that had to be taken to the hospital and things like that. Um, as far as poetry goes, it was very early on that I started to realize that I had a knack for finding rhymes and making rhythm. And it's kind of funny. One of my first poems was when I was in the second grade. It was Father's Day, and we were making cards, and I drew this sort of child's rendition of my dad. And I wrote the poem. What was it? Roses are red, violets are blue, coffee is strong, and so are you. And
I like that.
that's pretty cool.
Good.
That was my first poem, and it took quite a while, but I started getting serious about writing poetry at around 20,
Hmm.
and I started sending them out. But something I was kind of I didn't know a lot about what a vanity press was, and so I would take these ads and I would send them poems, and they'd say, "Oh, we love your poem. We'll publish it. All you have to do is buy the $75 volume, and you're guaranteed publication." And I never bought them, but I kept sending out the poems, and it just progressed from there over a number of years.
Hmm. And then you started writing like, this is more of a there's poetry in it, but I would say it's more of a memoir. Like,
Yeah.
would you like how would you classify Alert and Oriented times three?
Well, I would say it's more of a memoir. It's sort of, I have a writing mentor. His name is Richard Van Camp. I'm pretty sure a lot of people know who he is. Um, when I approached him with the book and I said, read this, and he read it, and I said, well, where do you think I should send it? And he says, well, I have no idea where you can send it because nobody's ever done a book like this before.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but there actually was one book about mental health that was similar that I drew some ideas from, and that was called Girl Interrupted. And that
Okay,
was
yeah.
made into the movie with Angelina Jolie. She won an Oscar for her performance, and Winona Ryder. And I drew a little bit on that. But yeah, it's hard to say. I put a few writings in there from different things, but essays, all sorts of stuff. I really sort of go by the title where it says alert and oriented times three, and then it says a snapshot of a severe psychosis.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I really like. I didn't intend it really to be a memoir, but I classify it as a memoir. But when I think of it, I think of it just as a snapshot, just from many angles.
So I'm also curious because you did include in the book like so it's the clinical notes. So how did you get access to the clinical notes, and why did you want to include them?
Well, it was fairly easy to get access. I think I just had to fill out some forms, and there's a person at the clinic where I go to, um, the mental health clinic I go to. They have one person in charge of all the documents, and they sort of stay behind the scenes. And I think I had to fill out a form to give to them, and then they gathered up what they could. I told them what I wanted, what I didn't want, and they gathered it up and gave it to me. And actually, the names were included in the names of the doctors and nurses were included in the notes, but I took them out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sorry, what was the second part? You asked how I got them, and then
Yeah, and why you chose to include them.
oh, well, I really wanted that was something I just saw done in Girl Interrupted, and I just thought it's really fascinating because when you're in the hospital, you don't get to see from the eyes of the doctor. And like myself, I thought my doctor hated me, but he was actually, once I read the notes, I realized he was actually a really, caring person and everything. And as I got better and I communicated with him later, he was very kind about, I contacted him. I said, well, I've got the clinical notes that you've written, and I just wanted to get your permission to publish them. And he said, those are your property. You
Okay.
can do anything you want with those. And but I still took his name out, just so there wasn't any problems. And yeah.
And then what about the notes of from like there's a note at the beginning from your sister, I think it is, and then your
Yeah.
dad. So why did
Yeah.
you want to include their statements as
Um,
well? Oh, and a friend. There's a friend as
yeah. Charity Slowbot. Well, my dad was the key figure throughout the whole process of my life. And like he was a very big influence on me when I was really young, and then as he got a little older, we sort of started to clash and everything. And I suppose that's normal with adolescence, but it was probably a little worse with me because I had sort of an unstable personality. um, but and then when I started to get older, I went in the hospital, and I think I mentioned it. I was actually in the hospital for 6 months, and it was Alberta Hospital, which is a very difficult place to be. It just, it doesn't feel like home. You really feel like you're in a hospital. And my dad came and visited me almost every day, which was just a godsend. Well, what was even more important was that after I was released, he didn't sort of just let me wander around in the community or anything. He came and picked me up, and we would go for a long walk, and we'd have a coffee, and we would talk. and just that little bit of exercise and the camaraderie and everything that we had. There was this one instance where it seems to sum up everything about what my dad was like. We were walking along. We like to walk from Emily Murphy Park over to the Kinsman Sports Center in the valley. And one time we were walking down this street, and I have this habit, because I've done since I started playing soccer as a kid, is to practice my kicks. I'll kick a rock, and I'll
Hmm.
try to kick it accurate enough so that it'll go ahead of me and I can kick it again. And so this is just something I do, and it's inside my own head, and I don't think anything of it. And one time I was kicking a rock, and I had it going for quite a while, and then I kicked it and it kind of veered off, and so I figured, okay, well, I'll just leave that, find another rock. But then my dad walked by and he kicked the exact same rock, and he kicked it back to where I could kick it again. And just the idea that kindness, that playfulness, and the fact that, even stupid things that don't matter to anyone matter to me, and then it matters to my dad. So yeah, so that was one of the reasons why I wanted him to write it, and also just simply the different viewpoint. And my sister was very instrumental also in helping me get better. She came when I was in the hospital for 6 months. She flew out, and she visited me as much as she could. And then when I got out and I started getting better, um, I had really wanted to travel, but I didn't have very much money. I had a part-time job, and it was someone suggested to me that I approach my sister and say, meet me halfway, and I'll come out and visit you. And she agreed, and I went, and it was just the most wonderful trip. And my sister was always such a kind and caring person, ready to do anything for me. And even though whatever I lacked, my sister made up for it when I was growing up.
Mm.
And so I was, and then Charity Slobot is just a very close friend who, it was interesting. I met her at a fundraiser or something for a nonprofit of some type, and I gave her my card, and I didn't think anything of it. But she called me back, and I was actually in Toronto at the time, and it didn't bother her that it was long distance. And we talked, and over the next few years, we became quite good friends. We would meet for lunch a lot, and uh, she's helped me with so many things, like applying for grants and
Mhm.
polishing up my work and things like that. So I felt she was pretty important as well to get her viewpoint.
Yeah. So, why did you decide to write this book about like this particular hospital stay? Like, why was it
Well,
important for you to share this story?
well, when I started getting sick, and when I started finding out why I was getting sick, that it was a medication, um, I thought that I had a pretty valid grounds for a lawsuit.
Mm.
And I don't know. It's possible I could have sued the pharmaceutical company, which would be next to impossible. They have so much money for that sort of thing. And I even considered suing my doctor, but after, I thought about it for a short time, and then I just realized he had no way of knowing the medication wasn't going to work. And one of the interesting things was that the medication I was taking, a dose of it every 2 weeks was like, I don't know, $30 or something in a prescription. Not like I wasn't paying it, but that's what it was. That's
Mhm.
what it was costing the healthcare system. The new medication that he tried me out on was something in the order of $600 per dose.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't like he was trying to cut corners or anything like that. He really thought this was going to help. And it felt a little frustrating. And then I remembered reading a poem about a poet who sort of had a guy laugh at him and make fun of him because he was a poet. And he says, well, this is the sort of thing businessmen would handle and things like that. And he said, I got back at him. I wrote a poem about him. And so my way of getting back at whatever bad luck in the universe that made me sick again, my way of getting back was to write the book. And
Mhm.
I think it's a lot better than suing personally. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I just want to remind any audience members if they want to submit any questions in the chat, we can take questions too. So I can just ask another question to Leif and we'll see if any questions come up and are relayed to us. So the other thing I never mentioned is your website. So this book is actually on your website too?
Well, when I first wrote the book, there's a couple things that happened. It was during the pandemic, and so I couldn't get out and do any promoting or selling. And I printed up about 100 copies, and they were moving quite slowly. I still sold to family and friends and people at the clinic and things like that. But I put it on my website, and it was something I heard Neil Gaiman say. He had one of his books had been pirated and copied over the internet thousands of times, and he didn't get any royalties for it. And at first, he was really upset. And then he found out that while his books were being pirated, his sales went up like 3 times or something like that. And so I thought, why don't I try that? And I put my book on my website for free as a PDF download. I got a few hundred downloads, and I thought that was pretty cool. There's information about my books on my website, but really you can't purchase it through there because I've never straightened out everything with PayPal and MasterCard and whatever else. But anyone who's interested in the book can either email me, and I'll put my email in the chat, or another way to get it, especially if you have a Amazon Prime membership, is you can order it from any of the Amazon stores.
Yeah. So also, like with this book, how did you choose the title, Alert and Oriented × 3?
Well, alert and oriented ×3 is sort of a term that nurses use to assess patients. And a few times it appears in some of the clinical notes. And I'm not totally sure how it works, but I think it's like alert to the person talking to them, or aware of the person talking to them, aware of where they are, and aware of their situation. And yeah, so I just thought that kind of resounded, and it was interesting. I added the subtitle, a snapshot of severe psychosis, because a lot of people really didn't know what alert and oriented meant, but just about every person who's been a nurse or anything like that is like, oh, cool title.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but yeah. So you also mentioned that you were teaching a lot in this, like in the book you mentioned teaching writing several times. So where were you teaching?
Yeah. Well, that was kind of the interesting thing. I had gotten a job through the Learning Center to teach creative writing at Alberta Hospital. And I had been actually sent there by the E4C, the Edmonton City Centre Church Corporation. They run the building I live in, and they had gotten me to go out and do some limited sessions of teaching at the hospital. And then I was told, well, why don't you try the Learning Center? And I contacted them, and they said, oh, we're actually looking for somebody who can teach English or teach creative writing at Alberta Hospital. And I'm like, that's interesting because I can do that. But the funniest thing was, as I was getting ill after I started on the new medication, my last day of being at the hospital, I was quite ill and I was having troubles with paranoia and all that stuff. And by that evening, I was a patient in the Green Nuns.
Oh.
And I have been working in the psychiatric hospital. I'm sorry, I almost said a bad word. But I've been working in the psychiatric hospital that morning and ended up in another hospital that night. And but after I got out, I went through a sort of a recovery phase, and it didn't last too long. And they took me back at Alberta Hospital. I'm on summer break right now, but it's a job I really enjoy. I go to it. I sort of run my class out of an area that's near the young adult ward,
Mhm.
And there's a lot of people that are going through what I did, and I show them different ways to use writing to express themselves and things like that. And I even try to give them, some advice from my own experiences and things like that. And it's extremely rewarding. It's not terribly lucrative or anything like that, although they do pay a very fair wage. Uh, but I just wouldn't wouldn't rather be anywhere else. I do that one day a week, and actually in the summer, if anyone's interested, once again they can attend the class. I live near Giovanni Caboto Park in Little Italy. It's next to the Italian Center shop, and we're going to have an outdoor class of poetry in the park
Oh,
starting on the
nice.
15th. So yeah, and it'll run for 6 weeks, and we're going to do it along with a we're going to do it along with a chapbook and have a contest to see who writes the best judged poem and $200 award. And yeah, so it's going to be lots of fun.
Yeah, that's and also outside. So that's like, were you teaching during COVID or were you virtually
Um,
teaching or how did that
I was,
work?
I was mostly teaching online.
Hmm.
Um, I had, let me see, I was teaching one class for the Wellness Network and another for at Alberta Hospital. And then sort of early on in or around the middle of the pandemic, I should say, they discontinued the classes for the online for the Wellness Network, or I finished up. I finished up one, and one was discontinued, and then I started going to the hospital in person.
Okay. So we do have an audience member question. Michelle would like to know who your favorite author is.
My dad is my favorite author. Um, it's funny because if he's listening, he might be angry, but he tried to be a writer when he was younger, and he did some fantastic stuff. Uh, but he never he I think he might have sent a couple of things out or something, but he was discouraged early on. Uh, and I'm pretty sure if that's the Michelle who I know it is,
Hmm.
she's going to know that I'm going to say Robert M. Pirsig. He wrote Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I was over at my brother's house one time and I saw this book, and it just looked iconic to me because I had seen, people playing around with the same font, doing similar titles and stuff like Zen and the Art of New Jersey or something like that.
Hmm.
And so I saw this book finally, the actual book, and I started reading it and I just couldn't stop. I was just so captivated by it. And there was this part in it where it's the story of a man riding a motorcycle around America with his son and his two best friends on another bicycle, a motorbike. And there was a part where he all of a sudden gets a recollection of something, and they don't talk much about it, what it was, but it hit him like a ton of bricks, and he slowed way down, and his friends didn't know what was going on, his son didn't know what was going on, and you start to slowly hear that he had schizophrenia and he had been through shock treatments,
Hmm.
and it was just so moving and so well done. uh, yeah, I wish he had written more books, but he wrote Zen Motorcycle Maintenance, and then he wrote a sequel that not as many people know about. It was called Lila, and my sister's going to laugh because this is a sort of a secret I try to keep. When I was very young, my parents didn't give me a haircut for a while, and my nickname was Lila instead of Leaf. And then my favorite author came out with a book with that title in it. I didn't think it was a coincidence, or I thought I knew it was a coincidence, but it was a very interesting one.
Okay, so we have another question here. Caroline asks if I want to purchase a copy of this book you're discussing, so Alert and Oriented times three, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Could that be a doable thing? Like, would she be able to get a hardcover?
just paperback at the moment.
Hmm.
Yeah, sorry about that, Caroline.
I have a question. Did you design these covers on the back yourself?
Well, this was the back. The back was a picture I took. Uh, that was I have a friend who he's a major book hoarder, and literally he had a small apartment in Edmonton, and out of this small apartment he took 5 U-Hauls full of books to northern BC to his retirement property. 3 of those times I drove the truck for him, and then he got a couple other people for the other ones. But just just the open road. I mean, it's got a picture of the highway and everything, and the mountains, and that's where I like to be the most in the world, just out in the mountains and the trees and everything. The picture on the front, it I am an amateur photographer, and the picture on the front was I have this camera that does high speed shooting, and I set it to the high speed setting, and then I'll sneak up behind a bird, and when he flies away, I just close the shutter, and it'll take about 10 shots right away, and then I pick the best one, and then I use that one for whatever I need it for, and so I did take the one on the front as well. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And it contrasts really nice with like the pink and the blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like how the light shines through his feathers. It's actually birds are just really light.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
have I have a bad habit of quoting trivia. They say they say that if you eat very little, you eat like a bird, but actually a bird eats about 3 times their weight each day because of the amount of strength it takes to beat their wings.
hmm. So are you working on anything in particular right now? Like,
I am I've written a lot of short stories and tried to send them out. At the moment, I put a collection together from my best stuff over the past few years. I published 2 short story collections. One was called The Base Jumpers, and the other was called Mustang Summer. And I don't actively promote them because I kind of don't feel they're as good. I mean, there are some good stories in them, but I don't feel they're as good as what I'm doing now. But what I'm doing right now is I've sent them to a private editor, and she sends me as she goes through it, she sends me the short stories, and I take her suggestions, and then once that's done, there's got to be a copy edit, so for errors and things like that, and formatting, and yeah. So I've actually kind of written that book, but I'm still working on it, and something. I don't even know what got me started on it, but just out of the blue, I decided to start trying to write personal essays.
oh yeah.
And I got into a class. I take a university class called Humanities 101, and I have to give a lot of kudos to my professor Lisa Prinz, who's just wonderful. Um, so I take this class, and as part of that class, I was allowed to apply for sort of a scholarship course of 2 weeks long about writing a personal memoir, and the stipulation was that you had to be a first generation writer, and with my dad having been born in Denmark and all that sort of qualified me, and so I did this, and it's been pretty amazing because I had an essay published in a publication called uh, the News Station, and it's what is defined as an alt weekly, so it's an internet sort of thing. They
Mhm.
focus a lot on prison, and they focus a lot on things like marijuana, different things like that. And so I had an article published in there, and they asked for another one, and I sent them that, and they approved it, paid me for it. They haven't published it yet, but they said once we do publish your second article, we want to hear about your forthcoming pieces and stuff. So it's going
Okay.
really well.
Yeah. So we have another question. Sarah asks, Leaf, I'm amazed by your productivity of 10 volumes. I am too. So what's your secret? Do you use a daily word count? Do you say no to distractions? Do you write at home or away from home?
Um, well, that's funny. The other day, I grabbed a laptop and I headed out to McDonald's, and it was actually it was a pretty productive morning. Um, now, one of the key things I think that I did in advance of starting my writing career was I took a typing course in high school, and I ended up with a fairly decent speed. It's like 56 words per minute, no errors. And I just always had sort of a talent for typing fast. And for the first while, that wasn't a benefit because I would write a lot of stuff, but it wouldn't be as cohesive and everything. But as I'm growing more experienced, then more of what I type is makes it into the final draft, I guess I could say. Another thing is, I love to write. It's absolutely the greatest feeling in the world, just to create something and for people to read it and get something from it. When I was 19, I was living in BC and I took out a student loan to get a pilot's license. And it was amazing. It was so incredible just getting in this machine, and taking flight and looking at the mountains and the ocean and everything all at once. And I thought that was what I wanted to do. And I had to stop doing it because of my mental health issues. And I was devastated. But like more recently, when I started to really get into writing and really enjoy it, um, I don't miss it at all. I totally feel that this has completely replaced flying for me in my life. I do have a lot of time on my hands. I just have a couple of part-time jobs and I have very low rent. And so I try to be as frugal as I can and make my money last as long as I can so that I have more time to write. And I have a sort of a rule that I don't like to let a day go by without having accomplished something. So I'll write a little bit. And if I'm working on something like a short story collection or a book or a novel, I mean, I do set word count, like a short story of 3,000 to 3,500 words, or 3,000 words in a novel or something like that. So, yeah.
Well,
Wow.
I think yeah, we're just about at I think we're at time. So I just want to thank everybody for watching and for your questions. And I'd also like to thank you, Leif, for just sharing so much and for sharing your story with us and your work. Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody have a great one.